How much of a rough ride do you think this is going to be for the Chancellor today?
It's going to be an extremely rough ride. He has a great problem in that it's a bit about like actors when they're performing live on stage, but at the same time their stuff is being streamed for the telly. Different techniques needed, so it's very hard to get that balance right. The difference is, of course, that in his case, that someone goes to the theatre, they want to see the show, but in his case, he's got a very, very sceptical audience because clearly what has happened, the mini budget that he announced has played extremely badly with the markets, as we know. The pound tanked, it's picked up a bit, but it went through a very, very rough period indeed. And there are very, very widespread voices within the Conservative Party, the senior ranks of the Conservative Party, that says, look, this is making us look like the nasty party. The worst bit of it is that, and it's stupid really in financial terms, but the lopping off the top rate of tax for the highest earners is just at the same time as benefits are liable to find themselves in real terms cuts because of inflation. The optics could hardly be worse.
The Prime Minister, of course, saying over the weekend that she felt there was too much emphasis on optics. But that being said, he's making his big speech today. And the backdrop to all of that, the Prime Minister yesterday distancing herself a little bit from the decision to cut the top rate of tax. Wasn't she very quick to say that it was the Chancellor's idea? Calls over the weekend as well for an inquiry into a champagne meeting that he went to with hedge funders the evening of the mini-budget. Do you think he needs to be worried about his position?
I think potentially, yes. I mean, I have to say that it calls to mind a famous sort of misquote from the Bible when Harold Macmillan, Tory Prime Minister, sacked half his cabinet. And the line was, greater love hath no man than this, than he who will lay down his friends for his life. Of course, Kwasi Kwarteng is in difficulties, and there is a danger that Liz Truss could actually ditch him and say, well, that bit was his fault, nothing to do with me, Gov.
It's interesting, though, Peter, isn't it? Because there are a lot of calls from outside the party, but also with inside the party, and particularly from MPs, for a change at the top already. The problem with that, and we see the likes of Michael Gove and things sort of stirring the pot a little bit. The problem with that is, surely, if there was a change at the top now, there would have to be, wouldn't there, a general election? There's no way the country could manage without a general election if there was another Prime Minister after just a few weeks.
Absolutely right. I mean, we're moving virtually into uncharted territory here. I mean, the rule of thumb is when you get to be the Prime Minister, you're chosen for the top job, you have a honeymoon period. But in Liz Truss's case, it's over already. You know, the partner is already filing for divorce. And it's all very well for her to say there's too much emphasis on optics. But the fact is, we do live in a democracy. How it looks matters. Because, of course, the voters are those who decide. I mean, what we had, the situation was that for Truss to get in to be the Prime Minister, she was, two-thirds of Tory MPs did not want her. But then it went down to the Tory party membership, which, of course, is well under 1% of the entire voting population. What she'd need now is to address the nation, and the real fear among the Tory party is that she simply has zero appeal, and but quite how the mechanism for getting rid of her remains very much open to question. In theory, she cannot be challenged for her job for another year, but in practice, if there were a real sort of upsurge of rage within the Conservative Party, well, then she would have to go. And of course, at that point, yeah, most certainly, with that degree of turmoil, there would have to be a general election.
With the polls as they are, it would be an act of suicide for the Tory party, surely, and there will be probably more pressure, presumably, to try and U-turn or change course at some point. It's just a question of, again, optically, how this new administration does that in a way that doesn't make them then look weak. I mean, it's a lose-lose situation at the moment.
You couldn't have put it better, Isabel. I mean, the most eye-catching poll of the last week was one which suggested that if those numbers translated into a general election, the Labour Party would end up with a majority in the House of Commons of some 300, which is nearly 4 times Boris Johnson's so-called stonking majority. It would be an absolute annihilation. So they've got their backs against the wall in that regard, which, of course, again, though, is why Conservative MPs are pretty resolved to do something and do something fast, because they're looking at their own jobs. The vast majority of them will be out of a job. That's not what they signed up for.